Kate Middleton knows how to give the perfect curtsy in any circumstance.
If it's the wrong way, then, well, I try and do it better. But no, I'm reasonably headstrong about what I believe in.
I don't think that we can ever have peace with my family unless the truth is out there.
Without pause, Princess Anne has just shaken the monarchy to its core. She was placed with the responsibility of delivering the king's final wish. It wasn't about the crown. It was raw, personal, and completely unexpected. Prince William froze while Prince Harry stood silent. Will William honor his father's dying request?
King Charles is now requesting...
Or is the family finally at a point of no return? Join us as we find out the king's final wish Princess Anne just revealed. The king's final wish. The ancient corridors of Windsor Castle had witnessed centuries of royal announcements, but nothing quite like this. On a gray February morning with security tightened beyond normal protocol, Princess Anne stood before her family carrying a message that would change everything they thought they knew about their future. King Charles had made an unprecedented decision. For the first time in modern royal history, he would not deliver his own family announcement. Instead, he had chosen his sister, the one person known for her unflinching honesty, to speak words he could no longer bear to say himself.
When it comes to the royal family, two of the siblings that garner the most interest are Prince Charles and Princess Anne.
Anne's posture was rigid as she faced the assembled royals. Prince William sat forward in his chair, his jaw tense with anticipation. Across the room, Prince Harry stood near the window, isolated from the family circle he had once belonged to. The silence stretched heavy between them, broken only by the distant sound of Windsor's ancient heating system. What Charles had asked Anne to convey was not about succession timelines or ceremonial duties. It was deeply personal, a father's desperate wish that transcended royal protocol and touched the raw nerve of a family torn apart by years of conflict. The king's message was simple, yet earth-shattering. He wanted his sons to find a way back to each other before time ran out, not as working royals, not as public figures, but as brothers who had once shared the same childhood, the same losses, the same...
Harry and William's special request to walk behind their mother's casket as it pushed on towards the Abbey. What courage.
Burden of being born into an institution that demanded everything while offering little in return. William's face betrayed his shock. His hands, clasped tightly in his lap, remained motionless as Anne continued speaking. This was not the message he had expected from his father. For months, William had been preparing for harder conversations about streamlining the monarchy, about drawing clearer boundaries around who represented the crown. He had not prepared for an emotional appeal that cut straight to the heart of their fractured relationship. Harry's reaction was equally stunned but different. His eyes met his brother's for the first time in years, searching for something, understanding perhaps, or recognition of the weight their father was placing on this moment. The brief exchange lasted only seconds, but it carried the weight of all their unspoken history. Anne delivered the message with characteristic directness, but even she seemed affected by its emotional gravity. This was not merely a royal announcement. A dying king attempted to heal wounds that had festered in public view, damaging not just his family but the institution they all served. The room's atmosphere grew heavier as Anne explained Charles's reasoning. His health was failing faster than public reports suggested. The treatments were taking their toll.
King Charles smiled and waved to crowds, spending time in hospital dealing with side effects from his cancer treatment.
And the king understood that his time to influence family dynamics was running short. He could restructure the monarchy's finances, modernize its operations, and prepare William for leadership. But he could not heal the emotional chasm between his sons through royal decree. Other family members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Prince Edward, typically the family peacekeeper, looked between his nephews with concern. Even Camilla, usually reserved during family meetings, appeared moved by the rawness of Charles's request. The weight of the decision now rested entirely with William and Harry. Two brothers who would have to choose between honoring their father's dying wish and protecting the boundaries they had built to survive their extraordinary circumstances. But Anne's announcement was only the beginning of a much deeper crisis unfolding behind palace walls. What pushed Charles to this desperate moment? The perfect storm. The medical reports arriving on Charles's private desk each morning painted a sad reality that the public would never see. His oncology team had advised reducing stress, limiting public engagements, and avoiding emotional confrontations. Yet, here he was, orchestrating the most significant royal restructuring in decades, while his body fought a battle he was slowly losing. In the quiet hours before dawn, when Clarence House stood silent, Charles often found himself studying the portraits of his predecessors. The weight of their experiences pressed down on him like accumulated centuries of royal burden. He understood, perhaps better than any king before him, that succession crises had repeatedly threatened to destroy the very institution he was sworn to protect. The ghost of 1936 haunted every decision he made. Edward VIII's abdication had thrust his unprepared brother, George VI, onto the throne, nearly destabilizing the monarchy at a moment when Britain needed stability most. Charles had grown up hearing whispered family stories about the chaos that followed, the hurried preparations, the institutional panic, the damage that took years to repair. Even more personally painful was the memory of 1952, when his mother, Elizabeth II, inherited the crown at just 25.
In the year of grace 1953,
the coronation of Her Royal Majesty Queen Elizabeth II.
Charles had watched her sacrifice her desires, her spontaneous moments, even her relationship with her children, for the demands of duty. She had become a living symbol of the state, but the cost was a woman who could rarely express genuine emotion in public. The young princess, who had once climbed trees and played with her dogs, disappeared behind the crown's requirements. Charles remembered family dinners where protocol overshadowed conversation, where his mother's warmth was reserved for private moments that grew increasingly rare. The institution had consumed her identity so completely that even her grandchildren sometimes seemed more comfortable with her corgis than with her. These memories drove Charles's urgent need to reshape the monarchy before his health crisis forced another unprepared succession. He refused to burden William with the same institutional chaos that had marked previous transitions. The cancer diagnosis had simply accelerated a timeline he had been developing for years.
We've received breaking news from Buckingham Palace, which has announced that the King has been diagnosed with cancer.
Medical appointments are now structured into Charles's weekly schedule. Between chemotherapy sessions and specialist consultations, he held meetings with constitutional lawyers, communications experts, and trusted advisors. The irony was not lost on him. He was simultaneously fighting for his life while redesigning an institution meant to outlive any individual monarch. The pressure was taking its toll on everyone around him. Palace staff noticed Charles working later into the evenings, reviewing documents with an intensity that concerned his doctors. Camilla found herself managing not just her own royal duties but also monitoring her husband's health while supporting his increasingly ambitious reform agenda. William, too, felt the mounting pressure. His father's condition meant that responsibilities were shifting to him faster than anyone had anticipated. The red boxes containing state papers now arrived at his home regularly. Prime ministerial briefings included him by default. He was being prepared for a role he had expected to assume gradually over many more years. The historical parallels were impossible to ignore. Like his great-grandfather, George VI, William faced the prospect of ascending to the throne during a period of unprecedented challenge. Like his grandmother, Elizabeth II, he would inherit an institution requiring immediate modernization to survive public scrutiny. But unlike previous generations, William had something they lacked: advance warning, and active preparation. Charles's health crisis, devastating as it was personally, provided an opportunity to transition power deliberately, rather than through sudden emergency. The question was whether they could complete this transformation before time ran out. While Charles battled his health crisis in private, another transformation was quietly unfolding across London. Who is really running the monarchy now? William and Kate's shadow coronation. The red dispatch boxes began arriving at Adelaide Cottage on a Tuesday morning in late February. William opened the first one with hands that trembled slightly, not from nerves, but from the weight of what this moment represented. Inside were classified government briefings, diplomatic cables, and state papers that only the monarch typically reviewed. His father's signature was nowhere to be found. Palace staff had received quiet instructions weeks earlier. Phone calls meant for King Charles were now being redirected to Prince William's private office. Meeting requests went through William's diary first. The transition was happening without fanfare, without public announcements, without the traditional ceremonies that usually marked such momentous shifts in royal power. Kate watched this transformation from their kitchen window as William paced the garden, phone pressed to his ear, discussing matters of state with the Prime Minister. These were not the ceremonial conversations of a prince in waiting. These were the urgent, detailed exchanges of someone already governing. The change in William's demeanor was subtle but unmistakable. His shoulders carried themselves differently. His voice held new authority during family meetings.
Time, talent, and vision to fixing environmental challenges, but they weren't getting the support they needed to speed their solutions.
Staff members who had worked with 3 generations of royals noticed how he commanded rooms in ways that reminded them of his grandmother during her prime years. But Kate's evolution was perhaps even more remarkable. While William inherited the constitutional responsibilities, she was quietly becoming the monarchy's emotional center. Foreign ambassadors began requesting meetings with her specifically. Commonwealth leaders made sure their wives were seated next to Kate at state functions. International media coverage increasingly focused on her reactions, her choices, her presence. The palace communications team watched these shifts with fascination. Kate's approval ratings consistently outperformed every other royal family member, including William himself. Focus groups revealed that the public saw her as authentic in ways that surprised even seasoned royal watchers. Her middle-class background, once whispered about as a liability, had become her greatest strength. The most telling sign of change came during a Commonwealth reception in March. As Charles struggled with fatigue, Kate seamlessly stepped into his role, greeting heads of state with a confidence that startled longtime palace observers. She knew their names, their recent political challenges, and their family situations. She had been preparing for this moment far longer than anyone realized.
After years in the public eye, here's proof that Kate Middleton is ready to be Queen.
William's preparation was equally intensive but more visible to insiders. His private secretary now attended cabinet briefings. His security detail had been upgraded to match that of a reigning monarch. Most significantly, his weekly schedule began to mirror his father's, packed with the kind of high-level meetings that prepare a future king for the weight of the crown. The couple's children remained largely shielded from these changes, but even they began to notice differences. Prince George asked his mother why photographers seemed more interested in their family outings. Princess Charlotte wondered why her father spent so much time on important phone calls. These were the questions of children watching their parents transform into historical figures. Behind closed doors, Kate and William held conversations that would have sounded impossible a year earlier. They discussed which royal properties could be opened to public housing. They debated the future of the Commonwealth. They planned how to modernize the monarchy without destroying its essential character. The most profound change was in how others treated them. Senior government officials now spoke to William with the deference typically reserved for a monarch. International leaders scheduled state visits around his availability. Even Charles's longtime advisors began presenting major decisions to William for approval. Kate's influence extended beyond protocol into the deeply personal aspects of royal life. She was the one Charles turned to when discussing Harry's future role. She was the one who helped plan which family members would take on additional responsibilities. She had become the bridge between the monarchy's traditional expectations and its modern necessities. By spring, the transformation was complete but unannounced. William and Kate were functioning as the monarchy's operational leaders, while Charles retained the ceremonial crown. It was a shadow coronation conducted in private meetings, quiet conversations, and gradually shifting responsibilities. But while William and Kate were quietly consolidating power at home, the empire they would inherit was falling apart. How much would be left to rule? Brothers divided as nations defect. The phone call from Barbados came on a humid Thursday morning in September. Prime Minister Mia Mottley's message was polite but final. The island nation would formally remove the British royal as head of state. Within hours, similar conversations were happening across the Caribbean. Jamaica, Trinidad, the Bahamas, one by one, the dominoes began to fall. William received the diplomatic cables in his study at Kensington Palace, each one marking another piece of his future empire crumbling away. The Commonwealth that his grandmother had spent 70 years nurturing was dissolving.
As the Commonwealth pauses to celebrate the longest reigning monarch 70 years on the throne.
What had once been a global network of 54 nations was becoming a much smaller, much less influential club. The timing could not have been worse. Charles's health crisis had left the monarchy vulnerable, and Republican movements across former colonies sensed their opportunity. The carefully maintained relationships built on personal respect for Queen Elizabeth II were evaporating without her unifying presence. In Montecito, California, Prince Harry watched these developments with complex emotions. Part of him felt vindicated. He had warned about the monarchy's colonial baggage during his explosive Oprah interview. Another part of him grieved for an institution he had once served with genuine pride. The Commonwealth tours he had undertaken, and the friendships he had built with young leaders across Africa and the Caribbean all seemed to be unraveling. But Harry's feelings about the empire's decline paled beside his complete estrangement from his brother. The two men who had once stood together at their mother's funeral, who had served side by side in military ceremonies, who had launched mental health initiatives as partners, could no longer bear to be in the same room.
And the young British royals are unveiling the next phase of their mental health initiative. Prince William, Duchess Kate, and Prince Harry.
William's approach to the Commonwealth crisis revealed how fundamentally he had changed since assuming greater responsibilities. Where Charles might have spent months in diplomatic discussions, William accepted the inevitable with startling pragmatism. He instructed his staff to focus resources on the nations that remained committed, rather than fighting losing battles with those determined to leave. This efficiency impressed government officials, but horrified traditionalists within the palace. William was making decisions that would have been unthinkable under previous monarchs, cutting ties with centuries-old relationships in favor of a strategic focus. He was governing like a modern CEO rather than a traditional king. Harry learned about these decisions through news reports rather than family communications. The brother who had once called him daily now communicated only through lawyers and intermediaries. Their last meaningful conversation had occurred over 2 years ago, and even that had ended in bitter accusations and slammed doors. Sources close to the Sussex household revealed that Harry possessed far more damaging material than what appeared in his memoir, Spare. Entire chapters had been removed at the last minute, reportedly containing allegations that could have permanently destroyed William's reputation. The existence of this unpublished material created ongoing tension within palace walls. William's advisors lived in constant fear of what Harry might reveal next. Every public appearance by the Sussexes was monitored for hints about future disclosures. Every statement was analyzed for coded messages about the royal family. The relationship between the brothers had become a high-stakes game of diplomatic chess played out across continents. The contrast between the two brothers' current situations is sad. William was gaining real power, making consequential decisions, and preparing to lead a transformed monarchy. Harry was building a media empire in exile, trading on his royal connections while simultaneously criticizing the institution that had created his celebrity. Commonwealth leaders noticed this dynamic during official visits. They saw William's growing confidence and authority. They observed Kate's increasing prominence in diplomatic functions. But they also sensed the institutional weakness created by Harry's ongoing public criticism and the uncertainty it generated about the royal family's stability. The most damaging aspect of the brothers' feud was not the personal animosity, but the public nature of their conflict. Previous royal disagreements had been handled privately, allowing the institution to maintain its mystique. Harry's decision to air family grievances through international media had shattered that protective silence forever. William's response had been to retreat into formality and protocol. He refused to acknowledge Harry's accusations publicly, but privately, he was hardening his positions on everything from royal titles to family access. Palace insiders reported that William's first act as king would likely involve formally stripping Harry and Meghan of their remaining royal connections. As autumn deepened, the palace faced an impossible choice: heal the family rift that was undermining their credibility, or accept that the future monarchy would be built on the ruins of relationships that could never be repaired. But as nations abandoned the crown and brothers turned against each other, Charles made one final desperate move. Could his radical vision save the monarchy from complete collapse? Charles's last gamble for survival. The meeting room at Buckingham Palace had never hosted a gathering quite like this one. Charles sat at the head of an oval table surrounded by communications experts, constitutional lawyers, and digital strategists, a combination that would have been unthinkable during his mother's reign.
I speak to you today with feelings of profound sorrow. Throughout her life, Her Majesty the Queen, my beloved mother,
the monarchy was about to undergo its most radical transformation in centuries. Charles's vision was breathtakingly simple, yet revolutionary. The royal family would shrink to its essential core: himself, William, Kate, and their children. Everyone else would lose their public funding and official roles. Centuries of tradition would be swept away in favor of efficiency and relevance. The bloated institution that had supported dozens of minor royals would become a streamlined operation focused entirely on the future. The financial implications alone were staggering. Royal properties would be converted into public housing. Art collections would be loaned to museums. The monarchy's vast land holdings would generate revenue through sustainable development rather than simply existing as symbols of inherited wealth. Charles was essentially dismantling the aristocratic framework that had supported his family for generations. But the most radical change involved media strategy. The palace's traditional approach of dignified silence was dead. In its place, Charles authorized the creation of a sophisticated digital operation that monitored online sentiment minute by minute. Royal engagements were now planned around social media impact rather than ceremonial importance. Every appearance was calculated to generate positive coverage while minimizing opportunities for criticism. This new approach required unprecedented control over information. Palace staff who had once enjoyed informal relationships with journalists found themselves bound by ironclad confidentiality agreements. Leaks, which had historically provided royal coverage with much of its intrigue, became virtually impossible. The monarchy was becoming a closed system, carefully managed and tightly controlled. William observed these changes with growing unease. His father's vision required him to become something no British monarch had ever been, a media-savvy, politically astute leader capable of defending the institution in real time. The days when royals could remain above the fray were ending. Future kings would need to be performers, politicians, and public relations experts all at once. The most painful aspect of Charles's gamble involved his younger son. Despite everything that had happened, despite the public attacks and private betrayals, the king continued to hope for some form of reconciliation. He authorized quiet outreach through mutual friends, sent private messages through trusted intermediaries, and even considered flying to California for a face-to-face conversation. These efforts were met with silence from Montecito. Harry's position had hardened beyond diplomatic repair. He wanted acknowledgement of past wrongs, public apologies for institutional racism, and guarantees about his family's security. The palace viewed these demands as impossible to meet without legitimizing his broader criticisms of the monarchy. William's position was even more unforgiving. He had concluded that his brother represented an existential threat to the institution's survival. Every interview Harry gave, every revelation he made, every criticism he leveled weakened the monarchy's credibility at a moment when it could least afford additional damage. From William's perspective, reconciliation was not just impossible, it was dangerous. Charles found himself caught between his paternal instincts and his constitutional responsibilities. As a father, he wanted his sons to find their way back to each other. As a king, he needed to protect an institution that millions of people depended on for stability and continuity. The weight of choosing between these competing loyalties was becoming unbearable. The modern monarchy Charles envisioned would be smaller, more efficient, and more responsive to public expectations. But it would also be lonelier, more isolated, and more dependent on the performance of a few key individuals. The question was whether this radical transformation could happen quickly enough to save an institution that seemed to be running out of time, running out of relevance, and running out of family members willing to serve it. As winter approached, Charles realized his gamble had created an impossible choice for his heir: save the monarchy by abandoning his brother, or save his family by risking the crown itself. Will William choose his father's dying wish for family healing, or will he sacrifice his brother to save the crown? As Charles's time runs out, can a divided royal family survive the choice between personal loyalty and institutional survival? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the next video showing on your screen. You will enjoy it.